sharing for the last 3 years when we have a chance. And he's so insightful, and it's not just about this one time. If you know Corey, you know that he's always thinking deeper. He reminds me a lot of Breno. But there's something about him, and we want to give him opportunity to share with us this morning.
Good morning. Lately, I've been thinking about what it means to be different. Not different in a bad way, but different in a good way. So I want to talk to all of us kids for a little bit today, but you adults can listen too if you want. You see, at this time of year, we are all dealing with going back to school. At school, we probably deal with stuff that is different than when we're here at church or at home. For example, there can be a lot of cussing. I hear that a bit. There's also inappropriate talk sometimes, and sometimes kids get mad while playing games, or maybe they say unkind things about each other. I guess what it comes down to is that some kids don't have a relationship with Jesus, so they don't know what it means to love like Jesus. As I've been getting ready to go back to school, I got to thinking about how the Bible has some great stories that tell about people who dare to be different. And that's what my goal is for us, all of us kids today. That throughout this year, the school year, that we will dare to be different. What does it look like to be different? Let's start with Daniel. He was taken far away from home from his parents. His parents weren't watching him, and he could act however he wanted. But he chose to act the way he had been taught. He dared to be different by choosing to not have to eat the king's food and ended up healthier for it. Later, he dared to pray and was going to be thrown in the lion's den for it. Daniel could have blended in and did what everyone else was doing, but he dared to be different and prayed in public anyways. God was with Daniel, and Daniel saw God's protection over him that night. Daniel's friends also dared to be different. They refused to bow to the king's idol. If they had, they would have been saved, but instead they stood for God, and he kept them safe in the furnace. Then there's Noah. He was the only one who believed in God, and one day God asked Noah to do a crazy thing. It meant being different, but Noah dared to be different, and he listened to God's words. He built an ark for the flood that was coming. Even though everybody teased him, he still kept building the ark. Can you imagine what it must have been like to have the whole world against you? Then one of my favorite examples is Joseph. He always had a good attitude, even though his brothers sold him to strangers. Then he was thrown in jail and got accused for something he didn't do. But even with all that, he dared to be different. His attitude put him in a place where he became a leader everywhere he went, even in jail. Another story is the life of Moses. He was pretty comfortable caring for sheep in the desert, but he dared to be different when God called him to leave his family and do a job to go rescue the Israelites. He was worried about his speech problem and made a bunch of excuses, but God was with Moses when he went to see Pharaoh. Each of these people had a choice: blend in with the crowds or be willing to stand and be different. Noah's courage to be different actually affects us today. If he hadn't dared to be different, we wouldn't be here right now. Moses dared to be different, and his courage affected millions and millions and millions of people's lives. Joseph dared to be different, and his choice saved millions of lives, plus he got to see his family again. Daniel and his friends dared to be different, and their stories have been talked about throughout history. These examples show me that we never know how our choices today might affect people around us, even people throughout history. So what does daring to be different look like for us kids today? It means not talking bad about others with our friends. We can maybe change the subject or just speak kind words about others. It means not using bad language. It means having a good attitude during gym or playing games. It means thanking God for our food in the cafeteria even when no one else prays. It means being a friend to someone who looks lonely. It means showing love to everyone, even your teachers. Even if you think your choices today aren't a big deal, remember that Noah, Daniel, Joseph, and Moses had choices to make too. They had no idea that it would affect history, but it did. So that's my encouragement for you today, to be courageous and dare to be different.
son. Good job, bud. Thank you. Wow, fantastic. Okay. Kids, the kids can go ahead and go to your classes. Thank you for sticking around, and thank you to the kids. Let's give them a hand as they go out. How fantastic. How fantastic is that our kids are leading us in worship, giving words. That's amazing. I love to see it. It's something our church is very blessed with, is lots of kids. It's a beautiful thing. Is it good? Is it good? Okay. I wanted to honor Don just a little bit this morning. He is in Brazil. Obviously, him and Rob are in Brazil right now, and I don't think we realize all the time and effort that Don and Lisa pour into this congregation, all the work that they do, all the anything from counseling to just time spent with people. And I wanted to honor him this morning, and I would encourage each of you to, if you get a chance at all, obviously pray for them, but encourage them in any way that they can. It's kind of a thankless job at times, and I would ask you to encourage them whenever you get a chance to do that. Remember them in your prayers. Second is, it is my wife's birthday today. Yeah. I'm not going to say how old she is, but she'll be 40 next year, so I'm not going to tell you. I can't believe it. It seems like we just got married yesterday, and this November it will be 19 years. And as I was thinking about it, thank you. As I was thinking about it, we were discussing a little bit and looking at, when we had gone on our honeymoon, we were trying to decide where to go, and we said, let's go to the Bahamas. We checked it out. We're like, let's go to the Bahamas. We didn't have hardly any money, and it was fairly inexpensive. Come to find out, there was a reason it was inexpensive, but anyhow, we took off, landed in the Bahamas. It was late at night, got on a bus with probably 30 other people, I don't know. Went to the resort. Everybody got off but us. And we said, this is either really good or really bad. And they took us a little further down the road, and they said, this is your resort. And we said, no, it's not. And they said, yeah, it actually is. And we said, well, it says Best Western. They said, that's it. And that was, needless to say, it was nothing like we had expected, but we didn't have the internet to look stuff up. We had a grainy fax that we checked things out with. And so we got there, and the floors were wet, and the water had seeped up the walls, and our ocean view room was one you had to put your head against the window, and you could just catch a glimpse of it. Electric would go off every afternoon for a few hours. It was really interesting. And then we got back to the airport, and I wasn't that familiar with airports. I'd parked in short-term parking, and I think our parking bill was $144. I didn't have. I mean, it was interesting. It almost, we were looking forward to getting back from our honeymoon, just getting back to normal life. So it was interesting, but it almost seemed a little hopeless. We were like, man, this is just not quite what we expected. And that's actually what I wanted to talk a little bit about this morning, was hope, hopelessness. Not focusing on the hopelessness, but obviously there is hopelessness, but focusing on hope. It was interesting when Ann shared that the kids were going to be talking, or were going to be singing songs of hope. It was just such confirmation to me. I love to see. She had no idea, and I didn't know what they were going to be singing. And I love to see the way that God works like that. Hope can light up a room or a face instantly. It brings light to a situation that otherwise seems dark and endless. And in my mind, we as believers ought to be the most hope-filled people that there are. We ought to be the people that the light beams from, not the ones that are without hope. Because we have a hope, obviously the hope of Jesus Christ, that far exceeds anything that tries to overshadow it. You don't have to look very far to realize that there's hopelessness all around. There are 1 million people every year who commit suicide. That's one every 40 seconds. There are 1 billion people going hungry. There are 120 million slaves. We could go on and on. But there's a lot of hopelessness around us. And I wanted to just look at a few things, what maybe causes hopelessness, and then give us a reason for hope. One of the things that would maybe cause it would be that people are searching in the wrong places. Colossians 3 verse 2 says, think about the things of heaven, not the things of earth. So maybe we're looking in the wrong places. We're looking possibly at the news. You don't have to look very far. You've got chaos everywhere you look. You've got shootings, you've got racism, you can go on and on. And not that we bury our head in the sand, but if we continually take that in and we continually feed negativity into our mind, we probably will begin to get a feeling of hopelessness. An example would be, so if you do a search on Google, the way that Google works is it uses an algorithm, and it is called automated reasoning. And the way it works is if you go in and you type in whatever you want to look for, you want to look at cars, you type in something about cars, it remembers that. The next time you go in, you look up cars again, it again remembers that. Pretty soon you're on a website that has nothing to do with cars, but guess what? You're getting an advertisement for a new car because it knows that you like cars. It's automated reasoning. It's basically putting out what you've put in. Coincidentally, I've had people say to me, I don't know how I've got pornography popping up on my computer. It's probably what you've put in the past, so I'd suggest you're careful with that. But basically what you put in is what comes out. It's the same way in our thought lives and what we think. We could possibly be looking at people who aren't directors of good news for our answers, for our news. And I refuse to spread the message of the talking heads. Because God has called us to be a voice of hope. He's called us to be a voice, not an echo. And so what is God speaking to you and I, and what are we going to do with that? People are also looking for hope in things that they can't control. So when things don't go as planned, because we were the designer of the plan, we lose hope. Another thing, they'd be looking for a superficial hope. Jeremiah 6:14 says, they offer superficial treatments for my people's mortal wound. They give assurances of peace when there is no peace. They're looking for things to fill a void in their life, which I think would be one reason why sports is so big in our country. Listen, I love sports as much as anybody. I've loved sports since I was a kid. I go to sporting events. I watch sports. I enjoy it. But I believe that it can be something that people use to fill a void in their lives. I remember when 9/11 happened, and the baseball playoffs were going on at that time, and they were trying to decide how quickly they should resume the playoffs. And I don't remember the exact length of time, but it was a few days, and one of the reasons that they wanted to do it was because it caused a diversion. It caused you to think of something else, which isn't a bad thing. You're going through your daily life, and sometimes you just need a little break, and sports can cause that, which is good. But I think what happens is so many times people look to it to fill something in their life that they're lacking. And I've seen it in athletes. that have gotten to the top of their sport. They may have won a championship in whatever sport it is. And they've gotten to the end and they said, okay, there's got to be more than this. This can't be all there is. I've just gotten to the pinnacle, to the top of what I was trying to achieve. That's cool, that's great, but there's got to be more to it than this. People are also looking for position to give them hope. You know, if I get that next pay raise, if I get to that next level at work, boom, that's going to be it. That's what I'm looking for. Sometimes what it may be is situations that just look hopeless. Maybe it's health. All of us have been there at one time. You've been, either you or someone you know personally, you don't have to go far, has had health issues that you obviously can't control. Maybe it's relationships with kids or spouses. Just like, I've lost hope. I don't know how this situation could be good. It could possibly be finances. The thing is God is a God of hopeless situations. That's what's so encouraging to me. If you look, you don't have to look far at all. It's almost every story. God takes a hopeless situation and turns it into a hope-filled situation. If you look at the story of Gideon, 300 men, and he's going to go fight a huge army. It's hopeless. In man's mind, there's no hope. But God uses it to create a great victory. Look at the story of David, tiny little shepherd boy. He goes out and fights probably the biggest, baddest man in the world. He's this guy, that's what he does. He fights. Hopeless. Look at the story of Moses, the same thing. He's got the children of Israel behind him. He's up against a body of water that he can't cross. What are we going to do? I have no hope. I don't have a clue. They're going to just slaughter us all. It was hopeless until God intervened, right? Then there was a way. He opened the Red Sea. That's not normal. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That's not normal. He opened the Red Sea right before them and they crossed. It was miraculous. Sometimes it's in our focus, what we focus on. One time there was two identical twins. They were alike, exactly alike, except in one way. The one twin was an eternal optimist. You couldn't find something he couldn't find something good in. Everything was fantastic. Everything was amazing. The other twin was a pretty dark pessimist. He couldn't find anything good with the situation. Everything was just, the world's going to end tomorrow type of thing. So their parents decided to take him to the doctor. They said, Doc, what do we do? The doctor said, this may sound strange, but he said, for their next birthday, I want you to go home and I want you to give the pessimist a brand new racing bike. Okay. But I want you to give the optimist a pile of manure. Well, that was odd, but we can do it. Whatever. After all, that's the doctor. So they went, their birthday rolled around, they got them their gifts. They got the pessimist the most expensive, the best, the fanciest, the nicest racing bike you've ever seen. Kids have never seen a bike like this before. He sees the bike and he goes, oh, that's going to be a disaster. He goes, more than likely I'm going to crash, fall, break my leg. This thing is it's probably a bad idea. I'm like, okay. So they had this manure wrapped up in a gift wrapping and everything. They give it to the optimist. He opens it up. He's all excited. He's not sure what to think, really. All of a sudden, he gets a big old smile on his face, and he starts running around. He said, you can't fool me. He goes, where there's this much manure, there's got to be a pony around here somewhere. It was all in his focus, right? One guy saw nothing but negativity. It didn't matter what it was. And the other guy saw nothing but good and positive wherever he was at. Another thing could possibly be mental illness. We've seen that. Not acknowledging our problems or not wanting to deal with problems. I read a little bit the story of Rick Warren, if you're familiar with him. He's the pastor of Saddleback Church in Southern California. He lost his son to suicide a few years back. I'll just read a little bit of it here. On April 5th, 2013, Matthew Warren shot himself. Shortly after his death, Warren described his son as an incredibly kind, gentle, and compassionate man. 5 days after Easter last year, my 27-year-old son ended his own life. He battled mental illness since a child, and despite the best doctors and meds and therapy and prayers and love, he lost his battle for hope, and our family was devastated. He had a brilliant intellect and a gift for sensing who was most in pain or was the most uncomfortable in a room. He'd then make a beeline to that person to engage and encourage them, said Warren at the time. The day Matthew gave in to the despair was the worst day of my life. During the past year, I've often been asked, how have you made it? How have you kept going in your pain? And I've often replied, the answer is Easter. You see, the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus happened over 3 days. Friday was the day of suffering and pain and agony. Saturday was the day of doubt and confusion and misery. But Easter, that Sunday, was the day of hope and joy and victory, Warren explains. Here's the fact of life. You'll face these 3 days over and over and over in your lifetime, and when you do, you'll find yourself asking, as I did, 3 fundamental questions. Number 1, what do I do in my days of pain? 2, how do I get through my days of doubt and confusion? And 3, how do I get to the days of joy and victory? The answer is Easter. It's such an incredible testimony because I'm sure as a pastor, probably the most incredibly devastating thing that he could think of would be losing his own son to suicide. As I was thinking about it, I just thought of the book, The Purpose-Driven Life. That's what he wrote. It would have been before that, I'm sure. But it was just interesting to see how somebody takes a situation that looks so hopeless and can help so many people with it and make a difference in so many people's lives because of his attitude and focus. Another reason people would be hopeless is because they've not been told or shown. 1 Corinthians 15:19 says, and if our hope in Christ is only for this life, we are more to be pitied than anyone in this world. So if that's all you have hope for, and so many people that's the case, if all you have hope for is in this life, man, I hate to let you down, but that's hopeless is what it is. A reason could be because we as believers haven't given hope. We're right there with everyone else, whining, complaining, the sky's going to fall, the sky's going to fall. We don't have any hope. We don't present any hope, and so people definitely aren't going to want what we have. We've also maybe given a false idea of hope. I'm just hoping to make it through this life so I can make it to the sweet by and by, And it's maybe a religious mindset, false idea of hope. But let's look at the flip side then. Transition into what is hope and why should we have hope and why should we be a people of hope? Why is hope so important? The reason I believe hope is so important is because those with the most hope have the most influence. If you don't have hope and you try to present something to someone, they're not going to want what you have. It's trying to sell a product. I hate to use the term product, but you understand what I'm saying. To someone without hope is not going to work. An example of that would be me trying to sell something. I am not a salesman. I couldn't sell a hacksaw in a prison. I'm not a salesman at all. If I've got a car, I've sold stuff on Craigslist or whatever, bought stuff. But if I've got a car here and you come to look at it, I'm going to tell you everything that's wrong with it before you ever buy it. It's got bald tires. You don't want it. Pretty poor gas mileage. It's got a rust spot. You can't even see it here. Come here. Let's lay on the creeper and look up here. I'll show it to you. It's got this. It's got that. I've got it listed for $2,500, but I'll give it to you for $15 because I kind of feel bad for you. Now, on the flip side, you got a guy like Brian Sneed. He could sell mayonnaise balls at a Weight Watchers convention. That's how he is. He's just as opposite as, it's just craziness. So he's going to come out, and he's going to show you this car. And he's going to say, you're going to look good in this car. That thing's sharp right there. What's your car get for gas mileage? 15? This gets 25. Think of the money you're going to save over the next year. This is what you want. And he's probably going to sell it for $3,500. Somebody told me, and I said, who are you going to buy from? You're going to buy from Brian because he's going to give you hope, right? He's going to give you hope that this car is the one I want. After the first service, somebody came up to me and said, no, I'm going to buy from you because I'm going to save $2,000. The person buying didn't know that. Hope, right? How do we present it? How do we present the gospel? How do we present our lives? Are we hope-filled? Or are we trying to sell an old beater? There was a scientist named Kurt Richter from Johns Hopkins University who did a study in 1957. What he did was he took pails, 10-gallon pails or something, I don't know what they were. They were high-sided, they had water in them. He took rats. He dumped the rats in the pail, and he said, I'm going to see how long these rats can swim until they drown. Water was circulating. He let them in there. After 15 minutes, the rats drowned. He said, all right, let's try this again. He's going to do a new experiment. Took the same pails, put water in them again. He took some more rats, and he put them in the pails. Let them swim around. Just as they were starting to drown, he pulled them out. He dried them off, gave them some food. Probably not water, because that would have been cruel. But gave them food, let them out for just a couple minutes, and put them right back in the pail. Let them see how long they could swim. The amazing result was these rats were then able to swim for up to 60 hours before giving up and drowning. That's a pretty big difference. Mr. Richter attributed the rats' newfound stamina and survival skills to hope and felt that he had demonstrated the miraculous achievements possible as long as one has hope. Because of that, they were able to swim 240 times longer than the previous rats. Because of hope. Don't tell me hope's not important. I believe that the darker the times, the more that we as believers are going to stand out because of our hope. And as people of hope, they ought to look at us and say, what is it you have? I want some of that. I want what you have. What do you have? It's interesting. You look at the sermon series that we just finished. Look at the woman at the well. What was it that was so incredible about her story? While everyone else had condemned her, she came to Jesus, and what did he do? He gave her hope. Where everywhere else she had been thrown away. She'd been despised. You're not worth anything. Jesus gave her hope and a reason for living. So why do we have hope? Well, for one thing, without hope, life loses its meaning. It's what is the purpose? We're just getting by one day to the next. Why should I keep on going? What is the point? Why am I doing all this? What is the point of life? I don't even know. I'm just trying to make it through. But we have hope because this isn't all there is. 1 Corinthians 15:19 says, and if our hope in Christ, I read it earlier, is only for this life, we're to be pitied more than anyone else. We have more to look forward to. We have a hope. There were two men that were seriously ill. They were in the same hospital room. One was allowed to sit up in his bed for an hour each afternoon to help drain the fluid from his lungs. His bed was next to the room's only window. The other man had to spend all of his time flat on his back. The men talked for hours on end. They spoke of their wives and families, their homes, their jobs, their involvement in the military service, where they had been on vacation. Every afternoon when the man in the bed by the window could sit up, he would pass the time by describing to his roommate all the things he could see outside the window. The man on the other bed began to live for those 1 hour periods. whereas the world would be broadened and brought to life by all the activity and color of the outside world. The window overlooked a park with a lovely lake. Ducks and swans played on the water while children sailed their model boats. Young lovers walked arm in arm amidst flowers of every color of the rainbow. Grand old trees graced the landscape, and a fine view of the city skyline could be seen in the distance. As the man by the window described all this in exquisite detail, the man on the other side of the room would close his eyes and imagine the picturesque scene. One warm afternoon, the man by the window described a parade passing by. Although the other man couldn't hear the band, he could see it in his mind's eyes. The gentleman by the window portrayed it with very descriptive words. Then, unexpectedly, a sinister thought entered his mind. Why should the other man alone experience all the pleasures of seeing everything while he himself never got to see anything? That ain't fair. At first thought, the man felt ashamed. But as the days passed and he missed seeing more sights, his envy eroded into resentment and soon turned him sour. He began to brood and he found himself unable to sleep. He should be by that window after all, he thought. And that became the only thought that controlled his life. Late one night as he lay staring at the ceiling, the man by the window began to cough. He was choking on the fluid in his lungs. The other man watched in the dimly lit room as the struggling man by the window groped for the button to call for help. Listening from across the room, he never moved, never pushed his own button, which would surely have brought the nurse running in. In less than 5 minutes, the coughing and choking stopped, along with the sound of breathing. There was only silence, deathly silence. The following morning, the day nurse arrived to bring water for their baths. When she found the lifeless body of the man by the window, she was saddened and called the hospital attendants to take it away. As soon as it seemed appropriate, the other man asked if he could be moved to the next to the window. The nurse was happy to make the switch, and after making sure he was comfortable, she left him alone. Slowly, painfully, he propped himself up on one elbow to take his first look at the world outside. Finally, he would have the joy of seeing it all to himself. He strained to slowly turn to look out the window beside the bed. It faced a blank wall. The man asked the nurse, what would have compelled the deceased roommate who had described such wonderful things outside the window? The nurse responded that the man was blind and couldn't even see the wall. She said, perhaps he just wanted to encourage you. What this man had done was he created hope in what seemed like a hopeless situation. This guy was in a bed, possibly waiting to die, but every day, because of what the other man spoke, he had hope. He had something to look forward to. That man had created hope in him. We have hope because of all the things that we constantly see God doing. Psalm 66, verse 5 says, come and see what our God has done, what miracles he performs for people. Think in your own life, what has God done for you? So many times we focus on our hopeless situations, our problems, our disasters, whatever it might be, and we seem to forget all the things that God has done for us. We looked at the list earlier of things that might cause us to be hopeless. Look at those that have come through that list. Look at those that have gone through so many things and have said, I'm just amazed at how God has worked. Look around and see all the ways that he's making his presence known every day. I think that sometimes we don't see it because, once again, we take in the wrong things and we don't see what he's doing around us. We have revivals taking place around us. We have people getting saved. There's large numbers of Muslims that have experienced the Damascus Road experience like Paul or Saul did in the Bible. Muslims that are coming to Christ. I just thought of it of the gentleman that came over, was it Ian Galloway, that came over and was talking, I don't remember. That was Ian, and it was talking about what's going on over there and how God is doing miraculous things. I read of a town, and I don't remember where it was at, but I think it was in the Middle East, where there was a whole town that had the same dream in one night. And no one wanted to talk about it because they were afraid to talk about it. But as they started to share, they realized how God was moving. God's doing all amazing things, even in our own midst. Pregnancies that weren't, where people had said, you're never going to have a baby. Pregnancies have happened. Relationships have been restored. There's so many things that God is doing that we have a reason to be hopeful. We have hope because God promised us a future. This is one of the most famous verses in the Bible, I think, but Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope." When this was written, the Israelites were in the middle of bondage to Babylon. They were actually in trouble for worshiping other gods. And Jeremiah tells them, you know what? God doesn't have plans for disaster for you. He has plans for you to prosper. In the middle of their bondage. I was listening to a Chris Valentin sermon, and I loved how he said that he struggles with any belief system that takes away our children's future and destroys the hope of nations. The gospel should create hope in our lives. After all, what does the gospel mean? Good news. Gospel means good news. So in my mind, it should be full of hope. And anything other than that is a false gospel. Finally, we have hope because we win. John 16:33 says, "These things I have spoken to you so that in me you may have peace. In the world you're going to have tribulation, but take courage. I have overcome the world." Luke 10 verse 19 says, "Behold, I have given you authority to tread on serpents and on scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing will injure you." That's exciting, people. Romans 8:35 says, "Can anything separate us from Christ's love? Does it mean he no longer loves us if we have trouble or calamity or are persecuted or hungry or destitute or in danger or threatened with death?" And then verse 37, "No. Despite all these things, we're more than conquerors through him that loved us." Overwhelming victory is ours. No more questioning why we are going through this life day to day, wondering what it's all about. We have a purpose. And even more than that, we have a calling to share this hope with others. Isaiah 9 verse 6 says, "For unto us a child is born. A son will be given to us, and the government will rest on his shoulders. His name will be called Counselor, the Mighty God, the Eternal Father, the Prince of Peace. There will be no end to the increase of his government or of peace on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and uphold it with justice and righteousness from then on and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this. Of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end." That's so many times so different than what you hear. But it's ever increasing, really. It doesn't appear that way sometimes, but I think sometimes Satan uses it as a smokescreen between what we see and what God is actually doing. God's on the move. It's an ever-increasing kingdom. When we focus on all the bad, are we missing the good? What will we think when we get to heaven? This is something I have to think about and look back at our lives. Are we going to say, "I'm disappointed in all the hope and the power that I had access to, but I didn't utilize it because of my focus being on the wrong mindset"? You can stand with me. I had to think about it with us as a church. Our mission as a church is in the community to impact the community. Are we as a church a beacon of hope? What if Centerville woke up tomorrow and Firm Foundation Ministries wasn't here? Would they miss us? Would there be that woman that came to the well and was given that living water and went away never thirsty again? What about us personally? Are we creating hope around us? Or are we creating negativity and despair wherever we go? Are you a hope-filled believer? I guess that's what I'm asking you. Maybe sometimes you feel like you have no hope. What do I have to hope for? Maybe you're in the middle of a hopeless situation right now. I'm going to ask you this morning to take and give your disasters, give your hopeless situations to Jesus. After all, He is the only true giver of hope. It's not a blind hope, but it's an eternal hope. So we're going to pray, and if you've got a situation in your life that you feel is hopeless, if you feel like you've maybe not been that beacon of hope that you know that God has called you to be, if you feel like coming forward or want somebody to pray with you, we'd love to do that. I know that so many have situations in their life that feel overwhelming at times, but they're not hopeless. And for that, I'm grateful. So if you've got something, you can come forward while we pray. There's no pressure. God, you're an amazing God, and I'm so thankful that you seem to work best in hopeless situations. God, in our lives where there's times where we don't even know what the next step might be. We don't even know maybe what the other side looks like. Thankfully, we know someone who does, and God, that's you, and I'm so grateful for that. So, Holy Spirit, I just ask right now that you would just release your peace and your hope across these people, God. Let us feel your love and a hope that only comes from you, and a peace that passes all understanding, God. Let us experience more of who you are and be a people that shares that with those around us. Thank you, God. Thank you for what you've done and for what you're going to do. We love you, God, in your name. Amen. Thank you. You are dismissed.